Alright, we're starting this video in a slightly unusual location. This is my storage locker. The reason that I'm here is because I'm looking for a retro boombox. I've got a few in here somewhere. I'm looking for one that's suitable for the device that I'm showing today. I brought it with me. I think it's in my back pocket. Hold on. Yeah, here it is. It's this little MP3 playing cassette adapter. Now, I've already tried it in a few different things around the house. In fact, we're starting this video kind of in the middle. We'll be going back to what this device is in a moment. But the things that I've tried it in didn't really work very well with those. So I think it would probably be most suitable for a good old-fashioned boombox. So I'm going to have a look around, see if I can find one. I know I've got a nice Sanyo somewhere. Oh, that's one of my cassettes with the coloured reels. I was looking for that one. Take that home. All right. Oh. Yeah, so I repaired that one not too long ago. That's sharp. That might be a suitable one. Keep that to one side. This is the one I was looking for, this nice Sanyo. Yeah, I think these two will do. I'll take both of them home and we'll go back to the beginning of the video and I'll explain exactly what this MP3 playing cassette adapter is and why it hasn't really worked out perfectly so far. Someone suggested to me that I should take a look at this. They thought it might be my kind of thing, so I put in an order and it was delivered very quickly. It's effectively a modern-day reimagining of a product that I briefly looked at 8 years ago, an MP3 to cassette adapter. Now, the one I tried back then was some kind of cheap, no-brand device that had already been on the market at that point for around a decade. The old model I tried has since been discontinued, so if you want something similar nowadays, then this is it. It's a much more sophisticated device. It's got a 240 by 240 touchscreen, support for high-res audio, and can accommodate micro SD cards up to 512 gigabytes, and it's very professionally packaged, seemingly ready for retail. That's it. Take it off slowly. That screen is vibrant, responsive and flipping tiny. My wristwatch screen is bigger. It's definitely eye-catching though to see a cassette with a screen in the middle of it. It's perhaps an odd thing to say, but the cassette shell is pleasingly smoothed off and feels like someone made an effort with it. So many modern cassette shells are cheap, rattly plastic with sharp edges. Not this one. Inside, you'll find a 330 milliamp hour battery, which in theory should provide up to 7 hours of playback. However, turn on the Bluetooth and up the brightness on that screen, as well as turn off the auto screen dim, and it'll last a lot less. The micro SD card goes in the top next to the volume control. On the left-hand side, you'll encounter the power button, a USB-C charging and data transfer socket, as well as a 3.5mm headphone output. And finally, on the bottom, there's what effectively is the other audio output, a 4-track tape head, through which it outputs the magnetic pulses to your cassette deck. It doesn't generate any power from the cassette mech. You need to charge the internal battery, however you plan to use it. Also in the packaging you find a nice set of earbuds. These are surprisingly decent quality for a pack-in. Oh, and you also get a tiny USB-C to USB-A lead, although mine arrived fully charged and due to the included music could therefore be used straight out of the box. Okay, let's have a tour of the operating system on this, and I've also got a couple of little tips which might be useful if anyone decides to pick one of these up. So first off, you've got to switch it on with the power button here on the side. The only other controls that are physical on this, of course, are the volume controls across the top. So everything else is controlled via this screen. And you can see along the top here we've got 6 options, 6 menu pages. We can swipe between those like so. Let's go into the first one. Oh, I was going to. It's gone off. The screen is set to go blank after 15 seconds, I think it is, to save on power. That's the initial setting. We can change that, and it's worth changing it because now if I want the screen to come back on again, it's not a matter of tapping the screen or pressing the volume controls. I have to actually press the button on the side here. Now, if you have that in a machine at the time that happens, well, your screen's gone blank and you probably have to take your cassette out, press the button, pop the cassette back in again. So definitely worth changing the setting for that to keep the screen active so that then you can quite easily change anything on here if you need to. Otherwise, this is what's going to keep happening. So we'll go into that in a moment. First off, My Music. That shows you what's on the internal memory. There's 8 gig of memory in here. It comes with some music pre-installed. It's the usual kind of menus here. You can select albums, songs, artists, genres, and you can drill down to the individual tracks as well. And if you were to say play a song on here, let's just pick something out randomly, very slowly, you'll get a bit of artwork on the screen, track forward and back, and a pause button in the middle there. Now I've got a micro SD card in the top here. I've got a lot of music on it. It doesn't appear under My Music. It appears under a different menu. My Music is purely what's on the internal memory. Now Bluetooth, switch your Bluetooth on or off here, connect this thing up to Bluetooth headphones or speakers. Settings, this is where we need to change something. So we'll go in here, display, that's the one we need to change the screen off timer. Oops, I missed a point there. So it's set to 15 seconds at the moment. I'm going to set it to always on. Of course, that's going to affect the battery life. But talking of battery life, I was playing something on this earlier, left it playing without realising it because the screen had gone blank, and I ran the battery down completely overnight. So I had no idea the thing was running because there was no LEDs here and the screen was off. So even though it's going to affect the battery life, I think I'm probably going to get more battery life out of it because I'll know when the thing is actually being used. Now at the bottom here, reset and format, that's where you format the internal memory or the micro SD card. Got to be careful not to hit anything wrong there. So moving across, library is where I access My Music. So if we click into here, you can choose between the flash or the SD card. And if I can hit the SD card, these are the albums, well, the artists that I put on here, and then there's albums within those folders. I've just dragged something across from my old iTunes library. So if I wanted to play one of these, again, usual thing, just go into there and play your way through the album. Now, you might have noticed something there that's a little bit unusual, and I'll drop back. Notice the track numbers, 3, 10, 5, 11, 12, 4, and 2. I don't know why this has happened, but with all my music, it's just mixed up all the track numbers for every album. I could go in any of these, and they're all just randomised. I don't know what it's doing, but it's just done its own thing. Now, it's not in shuffle mode. It's nothing to do with that. Shuffle mode affects the playback of the tracks within an album, but doesn't sort the layout of them on the screen. So yeah, all my albums are played in random order, which is a bit odd, but they are playing. So if we go into the equalizer setting here, this is where we can turn on the shuffle if we want to. It's off at the moment, but if we go here, we can switch the shuffle on, and then it'll just be playing the tracks within the albums in the random order. It might end up playing some of them in the right order now. And then we've got the usual thing. You can repeat the tracks or the song or the album over and over again. And then equalizer is something worth changing. I noticed the sound quality out of this was really quite crispy, quite metallic. A nature of the technology, I'd imagine, connecting this head to another head. For some reason, it just makes the whole thing very thin. So I've turned bass on here to improve it a little bit. It hasn't done a massive job of improving it though, but it's certainly better than it was set to normal, so I'm going to leave it on that one. So if we just drop out of that, the last one is that now playing menu. So it might still be on the album I was listening to. Unfortunately, my artwork isn't showing. I think that's just the nature of the way that I've got these albums on here. But yeah, if I have it in shuffle mode, of course, it'll shuffle the tracks within the folder that I'm currently listening to. So I've got all my music in albums in folders. If I wanted to shuffle across the whole of all my tracks, I'd have to put all the tracks into one big folder and then have it shuffle them. And it might not be a bad idea because the fact is you can't access this thing once it's inside a machine. If that's the way you tend to use it, popping this into a cassette deck. So you might be better just putting a load of tracks on the internal 8 gig of memory, sticking shuffle on, making sure they're all in the same folder, and then just using it that way. I think trying to access it track by track like this is a little bit cumbersome. It might be that you just keep your separate albums on the micro SD card if you want to use it as a separate MP3 player just to carry around like this in your pocket. But for those times you want to put this into a cassette deck, have a load of tracks on the internal 8 gig of memory, and then use it in shuffle mode. I think that's probably the best way to use this device. In fact, let's demonstrate it being used in some players now. Okay, so in front of you are a number of cassette decks which I have already tried this device with, and it works with some and not with others. I'll show you what I mean. First off, we'll start with this one. Nice little Walkman 2. Early model, good condition, works well with normal cassettes. However, if we'll get the track playing first of all. That's something you have to remember before you put these things in. So let's just get playing on the screen there. Right, that's working. Okay, so we'll pop it in again now, close it up, and you might see on the screen there the volume's going down. And that is because up here on the top, it's hitting that little metal bit there. Unfortunately, it holds it just where the volume controls are, so not really suitable for this one. This is a very similar design, this DD3. Pop this in here, and again in this one we've got the same issue. It's got the same design of case, so that's a problem. Let's see if we can switch it around the other way. Don't really want to fit in there. See, it's fouling again on that little bit of metal there, so yeah, that style doesn't really work. So I thought I'd try one of these more modern ones. These are ones that I like to use normally with cassettes. So one of the issues with these, of course, is when you were to close them up, you wouldn't get to see any of the display on this. But it's not a problem here because you can't close it up. For some reason, it just does not fit. The cassette won't locate. I think it's because of the metal part here pushing against the head. I'm a little bit concerned that it could cause damage. That it certainly doesn't want to close anyway, so we're not going to do that. Similarly with this one, this is one of my favourites for a modern one because it just takes a single AA battery in there, no gun sticks. But again, with this, it won't close. So that's out of the question as well. So then I thought, well, perhaps we need the bigger ones, you know, with a bit more space in them. So I thought we'll try the sports Walkman. It does not fit well in here because whilst the cassette goes inside, play won't engage. It must be something again to do with the mechanism down here at the bottom. I'll just see if it works the other way around. So press play. Now you can see it just doesn't work with that one. So that one's out of the question as well. So now we're left with these chunky devices, and yeah, it'll work with these. So if we go back to an original Walkman, pop it in here, I'll just press play on there, and press play on here, and that's now playing it. Let's get the headphones attached up. So yeah, it's working all right with that one. This one will be much the same because it's a nice big cassette well in here. We've got plenty of room around it. They're not trying to come up with a particularly small device, and therefore there's nothing fouling the buttons up here. It fits in well. And it sounds good through this one. Now I just wanted to point something out. Notice how fast that's spinning. If that happened with a normal cassette, you'd immediately press stop. You'd be worried about it because why is this one spinning and that one's not? And why is it spinning so fast? Basically, your tape would have snapped if it looked like this. Of course, in a proper cassette, we should be seeing both reels moving and moving slower than this. So it's a little bit odd to look at. I know it's a cassette adapter, it doesn't really matter, but it doesn't really have the aesthetics that I'd want it to. Now, the cassette MP3 adapter that I got years ago, one thing it did have was a series of cogs inside it, which connected both of these together. And it also slowed down the speed that they moved at. So it actually looked like a normal cassette playing in a way. Yeah, I know it's unnecessarily nitpicky and completely unimportant to most people, but to me, someone who's played a lot of cassettes over the years, I'd find this a lot less worrying to look at if it more resembled a regular cassette being played normally. Now, I just want to preemptively answer what I think would be the most common questions that would get asked about this device in the comments if I wasn't to cover them off here. Apologies to everyone that already knows how these things work. This is more for people that are unfamiliar with them. So what we have here is an MP3 player in a cassette-sized shell. It's a standalone device. It doesn't have to be put in a cassette deck for it to work, but if you were to put it in a cassette deck, it uses a cassette head. This here is a 4-track head. So that means it doesn't matter if you were to put it in this way round or the other way round, or your cassette deck's engaged auto reverse. The magnetic pulses that would normally be generated by the tape going past are being sent out through here and being picked up by the head inside your machine. So this needs its own power. It needs its own interface. Fast forwarding, rewinding, track skipping, all that kind of stuff has no bearing whatsoever on this. because these are just pieces of plastic that spin freely inside here. If you pause or stop, you'll hear the music stop, but that's just because you've took the playhead away from here. This is still playing. Bring your playhead back up, carries on playing through your device, but the track doesn't stop or alter on this whatsoever until you actually engage the control on here. So effectively we've got two completely separate devices that are just connected together via this, which is almost like putting a wire between them. So you've got no control over this from your cassette deck, and similarly, this has no control over your cassette deck from this end. Hopefully that's cleared up a few questions. Right, now here's that boombox that I retrieved from the locker at the beginning of the video, and the reason I picked this one to use particularly because it can't play tapes. The pause is jammed on, and it needs new belts as well, but that's no issue for this because it doesn't need the cassette mech to work. All it needs is the head to come into contact with this at the bottom and then the amplifier section to operate. Unfortunately, all that does still work, but that raises a bit of an issue with this in that the only way to control it once it's inside a machine like this is to take it back out again. Now, of course, you do have access to the volume control on the player itself, so set this to a suitable amount, you can adjust that. But all your other controls are off limits. Purely, it's operating as an audio out device, and all your controls are hidden behind this screen here. But if we press play on this one, actually we'll perhaps need to turn it on. No, we're all right. You can see there, it's coming through just fine. Let's turn the volume up at the top here. I'm not familiar with this particular machine. There we go. And with this one, because the pause is stuck, the reels aren't actually moving either, which is perhaps more relaxing to look at. So yeah, it's working just fine with this device, which cannot play tapes at the moment. This is a player that I got for a future repair attempt, which I haven't got around to doing just yet. But that gives you a bit of a demonstration as to how this could be used with something that can't actually function properly and give it new life. But of course it does come with quite a few compromises, one of which would be I'd like a remote control for this. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little Bluetooth remote to be able to jump between the tracks on this? The device that I got many years ago, it was a cheap little thing that came with an infrared remote. But it just shows that having a remote for one of these is something that is relatively useful. Because at the moment, like I said earlier, you're better off just putting a load of tracks on here, stick it into shuffle play and using it that way. If you want to narrow down to a particular album or track, probably not the device for you. One thing to bear in mind about a lot of the more modern cassette boombox type devices is that they use that Tenashin type cassette mech the other way up. So in those, your cassette would be playing like so, and there's no orientation sensor in this. There's no way to flip the screen around. So it would look like that inside your cassette well. And in addition to that, a lot of devices just don't have this big window on the front either. And here's one example. They tended to have these covered cassette doors at the end of the cassette boombox era. It was almost like they were ashamed their devices could still play cassettes. A bit of a closed casket for the tape. But you'll notice on this one, if I press play, whilst it initially starts playing, after a few seconds, this device triggers the auto stop mechanism in here. And it's doing that because both reels aren't spinning. So it thinks that the tape has either snapped or finished, and therefore the auto stop gets triggered. So you can't use this device in here anyway, so it doesn't matter whether or not you can see the screen, it's unsuitable. But even still, that's probably not a great idea playing this in here, because these early 1980s boomboxes were notoriously power inefficient. I think this one's using 8 batteries in here. It's going to burn through those in just a couple of hours or so. Even though it's got the pause on, I can feel the mechanism is still spinning around inside. So it's not a very efficient way to play back MP3s at all. You're much better off attaching this up to a Bluetooth speaker. So let's do that. Yeah, that connected up just fine, and whilst it might not be as visually appealing, it's certainly a much cheaper way of playing your MP3s back through a loudspeaker. But if what you really desired was to see an old cassette deck play digital music, then I can't help but think that a Bluetooth cassette adapter would be a better, if less visually appealing, option. And of course, the benefit to using one of these is that you can control the music using your smartphone, and you also have access to your streaming music services as well. In addition, this adapter, when it's placed in a working cassette mechanism, like this one, for example, will spin both the cassette spindles and at a normal speed too. And that's because this one uses the same series of cogs inside the cassette mechanism that attach these two things together, which are all driven by a rubber tyre inside here, which connects with the pinch roller. And that's different to this one, which doesn't have anything down in here at all and purely just spins that one around with the mechanism. In addition, in this one, as I mentioned earlier, there's no orientation sensor, and in this cassette deck, the cassettes are indeed played this way up. So yeah, there are some advantages to this cheap Bluetooth adapter if you really want to send your audio through a cassette deck to your old boombox. But they didn't go to the trouble of putting all these cogs internally just to make both reels spin for aesthetic reasons. It's so that when you pop the device in a cassette player like this, it thinks it's a normal cassette and it plays it without engaging the auto stop. Okay, well, to summarise, it's certainly an intriguing device. It got my attention with its little screen on the front here, which gives you the ability to play your digital music in your old retro devices whilst viewing the track information through the window on the cassette door. And it's certainly got nice fit and finish to it, good attention to detail. The packaging's good as well. However, the more I think about it, the less the idea of this appeals. The first thing is, as an MP3 player, not a particularly brilliant standalone device. I mean, it's compromised in quite a few ways with this operating system on here, the way it seems to muddle up the tracks. There's a few issues. If you're looking for an MP3 player that was just doing that, then there are better options out there. You've really got to want to buy this to use it inside a cassette deck. But then that comes with quite a few compromises as well. First off, it might not actually fit in your device. You also might not be able to see what's on the screen through the door on your device if it does fit inside it. And then in addition to that, you've got to put your music into this first, get it playing the tracks that you want before you put it into your cassette player. And then in addition to that, you're using two sets of batteries, the rechargeable one here, as well as the ones inside your device. This really only seems to make sense in a boombox to me. If you're going to be carrying this around inside an old Walkman, well, maybe you'd be better off just carrying an old MP3 player instead. It's one of those things that the idea seems very good initially, but the more you interrogate it, the less it seems to make sense. But I think as far as I'm concerned, my tape players are going to carry on playing tapes, and my MP3 players will play MP3s, and a device like this doesn't really fit in with my requirements. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.